Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope that you're having a very enjoyable Thanksgiving holiday. You know, there was a time when the day after Thanksgiving was known simply as Friday, but now it's Black Friday, though the emphasis is really on the green. We'll look tonight at the retail climate locally as the high season for shopping begins. Green is also symbolic of the environment, and in Baton Rouge, 2 activists are organizing to help save it. We'll discuss these stories tonight, as well as blighted housing, contractor fraud, and new life for the Milne Boys Home. At our table are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. From Baton Rouge, John Maginnis, publisher, La Politics. Kathy Finn, freelance business journalist, Reuters. David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV, Channel 4. David, first turn to you, and the long troubled road home is still encountering more problems. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to go away all these years later. Well, it's something that we've been working on for a long time with our partners at the New Orleans Advocate, and we put it out this week, the results of our very detailed investigation into data that we gathered from various sources. And it's very difficult because the data is not well maintained and it doesn't get put together real well by the various state and local agencies. But we're able to take a look at the city's blight data and the state's road home data, put them together, analyze how they coincide, and we found that you have a significant incidence of homes that were cited for blight that got road home money. Separately, the state has done its own little drive-by surveys to see how these homes are coming along. And you know, here we are, it's almost 8 years after Katrina, 7 years after the program started, and people getting $150,000 or up to $150,000 grants are not always complying. The numbers vary depending on how you look at it, but what we found was that 1 in 5 homes that are cited for blight in the city of New Orleans got road home grants.
So how are we doing with blight, though? I mean, we have cut it back. There were about 30,000 properties that were blighted before the storm. It went up, and then it's back down to about 30,000.
Correct.
So we're making some inroads.
Oh, absolutely. But if you look and say about 6,000 of those got road home money, then you start wondering what's the excuse. And I tried to take a look at that as well, looking at how the program changed from a program that would have paid in installments as work got done, and then became just a lump sum payout, something that former Governor Kathleen Blanco blames on former President Bush as something that was a political attack on her.
What was the reasoning behind that? That just give him the check, as Walt Leger was quoted as saying?
Right, exactly. I mean, if we think back to that time, let's be honest, people were upset about how long it was taking.
Sure.
And, you know, it's not just a political thing coming down from the White House. There was a lot of pressure here locally on Governor Blanco to get things moving, get going. They put out these gold letters in November of 2006, and like 25% of them were wrong. And people were it was just such a painful rollout. And so the pressure was on her to do something, but the nail in the coffin was on March 16th, 2007, when HUD said, you got to change this because you're not in compliance with our rules, even though they had sat with the state people and worked this whole thing out over 6 months, and they had to change course in the middle of the game, and the rest is history, because now the enforcement issue is really the problem. How do you enforce covenants where people signed a document saying, yes, I'll rebuild and occupy this house in 3 years, thank you very much, here's my money. And if they misspend it, how do you enforce that? It's very, very difficult.
Yes, how do you go after these folks? I mean, I'm sure that it's known where some of these people are, what they're doing, but there's no way to get the money back.
Well, the amazing thing that we found, and I did a story about this in the summer, was that people were getting letters, demand letters from special state attorney generals, and saying, you know, you got to pay back $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. But the people who were getting them were people who had complied. And they were being told, well, ICF, the contractor that was hired for almost $1 billion, made a mistake and you got overpaid. and they're saying, this is our problem now? But that was, so this is the kind of treacherous terrain that the state encounters when they have to deal with enforcement. If they go after the wrong people, if everybody gets upset.
And then, go ahead, Errol.
Yeah, in your story, Dale Atkins, you mentioned her, and her neighbor complained that she hadn't fixed up her house. But you had a response from Atkins who says, I'm giving the money back. I want to come back to my house one day. Are there many people doing that sort of thing?
Well, we'll find out, because there was actually a deadline of this week to respond. 53,000 people who hadn't responded to the state letters asking how things are going. I should point out that Atkins's neighbors were not particularly angry at her. She had actually kept her house up to a certain degree. She hadn't fixed it, but it didn't look like a total blighted. Like the other neighbors on the block had.
And so there's a chance, there's talk of more grants for these individuals who perhaps were victims of bad contractors or had to pay out their mortgages?
Not just talk. This is a reality, and this is happening. And I had done a story back in the spring about how a year earlier, Secretary Sean Donovan of HUD had promised that the money was coming and hadn't delivered. And then shortly after I did that story, they did deliver the money, $60 million in essentially replacement grants. And then people wonder, are you throwing good money after bad by giving money back to the same people again, although they would say, hey, listen, I tried to comply, but because there weren't these protections in place with the installment payments, I got taken advantage of by a contractor or what have you.
Well, we'll continue to look at your reports, because I know you're delving into this more and going to be uncovering more stuff.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, David.
Yeah, no problem.
Kathy, talking about shopping, 'tis the season to do shopping, to
Would
go
be
shopping,
would
and
be
there
the
is
day
some
for
shopping
it.
to go to here in Orleans, new shopping.
Yes, I've been looking lately at downtown retail and how much it has changed over the years. And what we're seeing is a definite tilt toward the upscale shopping retail shops and so forth, particularly, of course, at Canal Place, which has long been a center of more upscale shopping. One of the things that I found out is that there's a pronounced impact of the tourist market or the visitor market on local retail, particularly downtown retail in New Orleans. And that's because the visitor market is so strong, and as we know, the numbers have been going through the roof lately. And this is particularly not just from the leisure traveler, but from the convention goer. Some of the large conventions we have bring in, as many as 20,000 people at a time. And when it's a medical convention, this month we've had ophthalmologists and hematologists in town, large numbers of them. And when that happens, the folks over at Canal Place say they really see the impact from it. And the manager at Canal Place has told me, for instance, that as much as 40% of the business at Canal Place comes from the visitor market, not from locals. That's not to say, obviously 60% are locals, so there's still a strong local market going downtown and going to Canal Place and to some of the other shops nearby. Essentially, Canal Place is the center of it. We see, of course, we have Rubenstein's on Canal Street and Adler's Jewelry and things like that. But increasingly, Canal Place has become a center of it. Interestingly, we have just this week an opening by Tiffany. And Tiffany and Company does not open that many stores around the country. They're all over the world, of course, but they're not. They don't open stores like the Gap does, for instance, or one of those types of retailers. So it took a long time for them to select this market to come into with a store, and they took over the Mignon Faget space
In Canal Place.
And Mignon Faget is moving to a larger spot, which is shortly to open. We also saw during the same week H&M, a Swedish retailer, coming not to Canal Place but over into the French Quarter. That's another one, not necessarily a real high-end retailer, but someone who looks for that tourist market and who will really capitalize on the market. And of course, going into the French Quarter, they really tapped a spot. And their people said that they waited until the proper location was ready. So what we find is that the visitor market is really, really swinging, it has a lot of power with the kinds of retailers that you're seeing all over downtown. We're also seeing, of course, next year, what has formerly been the Riverwalk Marketplace is going to become the outlet collection at Riverwalk. And that's going to have a very different character than it has in the past, a definite upscale tilt. Neiman Marcus will be anchoring this store. Of course, these are the outlet stores. These are not their original stores, but I think it's called Last Call Studio by Neiman Marcus. That's an anchor for, they have, I think, 4 dozen retailers who have already signed on. They're going to open with nearly full occupancy in 2014. And they tell me that they, again, the visitor market is really, really driving it. Tourists apparently love to shop outlet malls. And coming into New Orleans, they're going to have this upscale mall that's available. Where is it? Right next to the convention center and right next to, virtually adjacent to the cruise ship terminal.
Right. Yeah, big
so
market
you have
there.
thousands of people coming out of there.
But that hasn't worked in the past, right? I mean, that's been, in the mid-'80s, they opened it up and everybody was all excited, and then it just seemed to die out.
I think the Riverwalk has never had a distinct character. There's always been a lot of shops going in and out. It was, they tried different things there, but I think retail analysts tell me that if anything is going to succeed there, it's going to be something like this, an outlet mall, and particularly with an upscale bent.
I know tourists will be looking for it, but locals are looking for it too,
Definitely.
anxious to go shopping over there.
Definitely.
Thanks a lot, Kathy. John, we are seeing the joining forces of General Honore and John Barry, who's been a bit of a crusader for green issues involving Louisiana.
Well, John Barry is well known as from the former vice chairman of the Southeast Flood Protection Authority, but General Russell Honore, who kind of was the hero post-Katrina, has taken up the environmental cause over the last year. He was inspired by the sinkhole in Assumption Parish and the plight of the people of Bayou Corn. And he's taken up the whole issue of the environment, and he's also interested in he's a big supporter of the Flood Protection Authority's lawsuit. And he and John Barry has organized a new group called Restore Louisiana Now, and General Honore, retired general, he said he's going to lead a green army to the Capitol to fight for environmental issues. Well, they'll be met by another green army there, the army of paid lobbyists, very well paid, entrenched, who have held the Capitol now for about 8 decades. But I think this will be the first time you'll see as there's been environmental issues there before, especially after Katrina and the group that rallied for one levee board, but never as broad a sweep of environmental issues backed by at least this kind of celebrity muscle, and with some high-profile causes. And it's not to say any of it's going to succeed, but I think they will have a greater voice than they've had before. The question is, how many volunteers will they get out to help them lobby? How General Honore said he's not being paid by anybody. He's doing this volunteer, so it's a question of persistence. And sometimes as Senate President John Alario says, good bills take 3 or 4 years to pass. The bad bills we pass right away. And so it may not be something that's going to be happening in one session. They may have to be looking at coming back. But the big fight of the next session will be this lawsuit by the Flood Protection Authority. Will the legislature try to short circuit it? And that probably be the big clash of the armies.
John, you have a lot of legislators who represent the southern part of the state along the coastal areas and the New Orleans area. I mean, who just, for the very interest of their districts, should have an interest in those environmental issues, no matter what the environmentalists say. I mean, isn't the issue itself a force for these people?
Well, it is, especially in the southeastern part of the state. But as more as you get, when you cross outside of Jefferson Parish, you move into Lafourche and Terrebonne, there the oil field industry, the oil and gas industry, and the oil field support industry is the economy. And the people there are a lot more reticent about taking on the oil companies or wanting to sue them because they see that as their livelihood. The governments of Lafourche Parish and Terrebonne Parish said they're not going to follow suit with Jefferson and Plaquemines and file those local suits that were also been filed. Right. So it's different among the coasts, but the closer you get to New Orleans, the experience with the oil industry would be that they used to employ a lot of people here and they all left for Houston. But you get further out of New Orleans and it is still a bedrock of the economy.
What are some of the other issues you think that they're going to be tackling?
Well, another big issue is going to be up is, and it's like a bad penny coming back, is the issue of the legacy lawsuits of the the people who are sued for environmental damages on oil fields that happened maybe decades ago, that these enterprising lawyers are filing suit and filing the chain of leases back to ExxonMobil and Chevron and like that. And it's been a bane of the oil and gas industry. And they keep trying to. They tried 2 times to go to the legislature to resolve the issue, to force the issue to what especially judges in Southwest Louisiana these huge awards that they've given out. And it's not that easy to do for the legislature to tell the judicial branch how it can handle certain cases. Well, we're going to probably see a reprise of that, and there'll be 2 clashes of 2 armies there, one the business side on one, and these environmental lawyers who are very well heeled on the other. So probably more so than we've seen in quite a few years, environmental issues are going to be front and center at the legislature next year.
How did those parish lawsuits affect the flood authority lawsuit? Does it help bolster it, or does it just make it more of a fait accompli that it gets killed?
Well, I mean, I think the parish seats the legislature really has little control over them because those are actions by local governments. But at the same time, it's not the sweeping kind of lawsuit that the Flood Protection Authority has. It's like 28 suits on each one on a different permit, but those lawyers can file a lot of suits once they get going.
So we're going to see some action starting in the 2014 session. More action from this new.
Right,
new duo.
and with more of a public face behind the environmental movement.
All right, John, thanks so much.
It sounds like Bobby Jindal is taking the same issues to the Corps of Engineers.
And that's going to be interesting to see how that works out, and the idea of suing the Corps of Engineers and what kind of relief you're going to get there.
We're going to have to jump over to Errol right now. Milne Boys Home is getting some new life, and it's for a new purpose.
Yeah, for this Thanksgiving weekend, this is a feel-good story. It's a beautiful property on Franklin Avenue, at 5420 Franklin Avenue. It's been abandoned for the longest time. It was, before Katrina, it was something that was used to bring kids for after-school activities. And of course, it had a lot of roots in boys' homes in New Orleans, back to the old colored waifs home, which was what it was called, where Louis Armstrong learned to play the cornet. And so it's all part of that pattern that developed, but nothing's been going on there because it was in disrepair. They got $11 million from FEMA, and so this week they announced the project to redo this, maintain the property, and it's going to be the headquarters of what is now called the New Orleans Recreation Development Commission. A lot of people remember NORD, which stood for New Orleans Recreation Department. They got the same acronym and added the letter C to it and changed the word. This has really been one of the big goals of the Landrieu administration, to rebuild what was once a very powerful and popular organization. And this is really a major first step, because the entire headquarters now, that agency is scattered across 3 different buildings. They're going to be in one place. They're going to have a recreation complex. They're going to have a gymnasium. But also the Landrieu administration has a NOLA for Life project that's going on too, where there is the kind of training and counseling needed to try to ward off situations that could lead people into homicide situations. And so NOLA for Life is going on there. There's recreation. If this thing fulfills the ambition, it's going to really be a wonderful place. I mean, it's going to really be a place where good things can happen in a very good setting. And in a part of town that's sort of on the edge, and so could probably use something like that.
And when do you think it'll be ready to function in this new?
Well, I think it's going to be ready to function by increments. In fact, there's a couple of buildings they can just fix up. They don't even know what they're going to use it for just yet. But I think by increments, it's going to really be an important part of the city.
All right, thanks a lot, Errol. David, I'm going to go back to you and sort of relating back again to Road Home. Still going back to that Road Home, a contractor who was involved in some in rebuilding projects has gotten into a little bit of hot water because of it, and you've been doing stories about that.
Yeah, well, we first exposed it actually last October, that this Praveen Kailas, who was a subcontractor in the state's small rental road home program called the Small Rental Repair Program, he was monitoring the advancement of reconstruction of mom and pop rental units, and he was billing for doing full hours on that, while we were able to find that he was actually working on other projects, other publicly funded projects, building his own mansion off of Bayou St. John. So the state promised a full inquiry into this, and the feds picked it up as well. And in August, he pleaded guilty to 2 federal felonies, and he's awaiting sentencing next month. But I found, after getting some state records that I'd waited months for, that the state's inquiry was not exactly what it was cracked up to be. They put somebody who's actually connected to Mr. Kailas in charge of the inquiry, and he, of course, said he hadn't done anything wrong. So this is a problem program in that regard. I also found a similar billing issue going on with former State Representative Gerard Jackson, who was later convicted of tax fraud. So this is an issue with this program. Mr. Kailas actually was involved as the front of a project downtown related back to development downtown. He was going to be redeveloping the Woolworth building, and I reported this week that that project is going forward with his father at the helm.
So what is the status of it now? And he's saying he has new attorneys, I understand,
That's
new representation, and so where is it now?
Interestingly, he pleaded guilty, but he's now hired 2 very high-powered white-collar defense attorneys, Billy Gibbons and Kyle Shonickas, as he prepares for sentencing in December. There have been some he's expressed some concern with the probation report, possibly some disputes over how much money he actually stole.
In the Road Home program, just generally, as you guys are digging, and I know you're digging more and more into it, and as you said, it's been a really pretty complex and difficult thing to dive into. But what are you uncovering? What are you discovering regarding contractor fraud and the problems that this has caused for neighborhoods to come back?
Well, when you look at it at the face, that under the Blanco administration, they had trouble getting the money out the door, but they had protections in place to prevent fraud. But what we're seeing on the back end is this run on these programs by contractors. When they follow the money, and you see it now in New Jersey with Sandy relief. A lot of these contractors who popped up overnight here in Louisiana are popping up overnight in New Jersey. And some of the same companies like ICF and HGI that got big contracts here out of the blue are getting the big contracts up there as well. So you really have to pay close attention to the money and see how it's being managed.
Okay, well, we'll be paying close attention to your future reports. Once again, John, back to you. Legislative pay is an issue that you've been taking a look at. What, our legislature, how are they paid? How well, how poorly, and how do they compare to other states?
Our website, lawpolitics.com, looked closer into legislative pay. We know kind of the basics of it, but there's a lot of variations there, and no legislator is paid exactly the same. And legislators can expand their salary or their compensation a good bit, depending on how active they are as legislators, especially going to committee meetings during the interim. And certain officials within the legislature get pay bonuses because they have the Senate Finance Chairman or the House Appropriations Chairman. But there's a standard, people know that the base salary is $16,800 a year. Well, it's really $22,800 a year because there's another $6,000 called an unvouchered expense. It means they don't have to hand a receipt, and it's taxable income. They got to pay taxes on it. So it's really about $23,000 a year, and then the standard per diem is $149 a day. They get paid every day they're in session, whether or not they're there or not. And they work a 4-day week, and the 3 days they're not there. But they make another $14,000, $15,000 in per diem during the session. So most legislators make in the mid-30s, and some, though, make well more than that because they maybe chair a committee that has meetings outside of the session, and they get paid mileage, 51 cents a mile. If you drive a Prius, you can make out like a bandit on that. And so it all stacks up to be, in the end, still a whole lot of money. I know these men and women, and they by far, most of them work a lot more than half-time. Most of them work close to full-time, and it comes, phone calls come out of the blue about constituents wanting help on some issue that maybe the state has nothing to do with, but these legislators got to try and respond almost as ombudsmen for their constituents. So there's a lot to be. That said, there doesn't look to be any appetite among them to try and get a pay raise. That blew up in their face in 2008, in Governor Jindal's face too.
And Duplessis.
Yeah, right. Right. Unfortunate photograph. But the law now states that they can only get a pay raise by voting for it before the election and having it take place after the election.
So how does it stack up, the pay, to other states, would you say?
Well, the states that are paid the most do have full-time legislatures. You know, if you're a state senator, there's almost as many state senators as there are congressmen in California, and it's a lot easier job. So those in Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, full-time legislators, some of those make 70, 80,000. But some, like Mississippi and Texas, get paid much less than even those in Louisiana do. And like in New Hampshire, they get $200 a year. You know,
and that's a full-time legislative?
No, those are not. Those are not. There's only a handful of full-time. Yeah. Those are the big states. So Louisiana is probably in the middle of the part-time legislature.
Plus, a lot of them are attorneys or insurance agents, and there's that time during the summer when they're in session, they really don't have time to work with their other job, even if they want to.
You know, and that's why you see a lot of people who are entrepreneurs and work for themselves. A lot of them own convenience stores. There's a lot of insurance agents, a lot of attorneys, and yeah, it wreaks havoc with your practice. But you do have it's a lot different than, you know, having a 9-to-5 job where you got to, you know, the employer has to let you go to Baton Rouge. There's not many people like that.
Or you could be like Gerard Jackson and just put down that you work the 8 hours of the other job.
Yeah, you go right.
But the other big difference is that you essentially have to put up money to apply for the job, and that is to run for the office. I mean, and
you don't see many. The office never goes begging. Always someone files to take it.
Someone wants to fill that seat. Let's take a look ahead. Errol.
Yeah, last Wednesday, a blog, that's the real estate blog, rated the most interesting neighborhoods in New Orleans. And number one was, no surprise, was that being the French Quarter, and in Marigny and Bywater and Uptown did well. I thought what was really interesting was Ferret was number 7 on their list, or number 8 out of 10. There was a time when no one would have touched Ferret. I mean, Ferret would have been number 1 on the list of the least interesting neighborhoods, but I think it's a real tribute to the people of Ferret Street that now is starting to make the list about the most interesting, and I think in future lists it's going to climb even further.
Indeed it is. Congrats to them. John.
Well, you know, the Times-Picayune and Fox News 8 just finished an exhaustive series on campaign contributions, and what they found out a lot is that legislators particularly exceed the limits of the kind of money they can get, especially from PACs. But there's just no enforcement because there's no one checking those accounts. But now that it has been exposed in the paper, some of the legislators who got more money from PACs than they were supposed to get have written checks, but still others we haven't heard from.
So we'll be looking for that. Kathy?
Back to shopping. Now that we're almost past Black Friday, I think you're going to be hearing more about the online retail season, which is growing by leaps and bounds every year. Many more billions are being sold online. This inevitably will produce the usual backlash by lawmakers saying we've got to grab some of that sales tax that's slipping out of our hands.
We'll see if that will come to pass. David?
Well, as you said, Marcia, I'm going to be continuing to look at the situation with the road home, with this week being the deadline for people to turn in their self-report letters. We'll see how that goes.
All right. I thank you guys very much for joining us on this holiday weekend. And I thank you all very much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week on Informed Sources. Have a good evening.